Courtland Sutton was back at Denver Broncos mandatory minicamp, but it was Tim Patrick who stole the show. He looked like his old self. We'll tell you what we saw from day one of Broncos mandatory minicamp here on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Broncos Country, what's up? Welcome into another episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much once again to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country. Thank you so much for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day every single day. Just a reminder, as always, you can get us for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So make sure you subscribe or follow so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team every single day, all year long. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. I cover the team in person in Dove Valley every day. Joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, the longtime site expert over there at predominantlyorange.com. Today's episode show is brought to you by our friends over there at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Sayre, day one of Broncos mandatory minicamp in the books following Tuesday's practice. We got day 2 coming up on Wednesday, day 3 coming up on Thursday before players are off for training camp for a long time break before the report there. But, you know, everyone's talking about quarterback competition. There's so many different positions that are battling right now, but we're going to focus on the wide receiver position to really kick off today's episode of the show. Courtland Sutton, obviously back at mandatory minicamp here for the Broncos. He met with the media afterwards and talked about how their Broncos and him are kind of in a stalemate right now contractually. But the star of the show for the afternoon was Tim Patrick, who saw his first reps participating in team period. And man, was he getting acclimated with all the quarterbacks, Bo Nix, Jarrett Stidham, and Zach Wilson. Tim looked a little bit like his old self. It was great to see a day one of Broncos minicamp.
Maybe some of the most welcomed news of the entire 2024 offseason, isn't it? Because nobody really knew what to expect with Tim Patrick coming back off of 2 season-ending injuries. Obviously, the ACL, the Achilles, especially those types of injuries, right? I mean, when you're talking about a knee and the Achilles, you're often talking about guys that are like, I mean, if they come back, I mean, can you really expect the same guy? And that's the tough thing about it is, it's like we go into the offseason hoping the Broncos sign receiver, draft receiver, which they did, because we don't know what Tim Patrick is going to bring to the table, especially because he's now approaching the age of 30, which, in the NFL, that's tough, coming off 2 big injuries. But to hear that he's out there looking good at mandatory minicamp and helping all of the quarterbacks, I think that's another big aspect of this, is that a guy like Tim Patrick working in with every rotation, not just the ones, but working in with every quarterback, is going to make all of these guys so much better because he's a reliable player. He's going to be getting open. He's got strong hands. I mean, look, this is maybe some of the most underrated news of the entire 2024 offseason for the Broncos.
It's a pleasing development to come about because, as we all mentioned during OTAs, Tim would participate in individual. He'd participate in routes on air, but when they went 7-on-7 team, he never participated in those during OTAs. To see him do it now is an impressive step in the right direction. Though I will say at this point here, Sayre, I would not be shocked. And obviously Wednesday's practice is going to be a big tell-all for us, but I wouldn't be shocked if we see Tim have a vet day on Wednesday, right? I think that the Broncos still plan to be very smart with how they utilize him in terms of how much they give him. Like, for example, during Tuesday's practice, Adam Troutman kind of had a little bit of a rest day. They're really kind of monitoring his reps because he came up with a core muscle strain, not a tear, nothing that needed surgery, according to Sean Payton. But, they want to be smart with him as he's managing some soreness. So I imagine for Tim to be able to do those explosive movements and things that he's been doing, we've seen Denver do this historically, especially in Sean Payton's first year. Going back to with Javonte Williams, like Javonte would participate, I think 1 or 2 days fully, and then would have a vet day off. I would not be surprised at this point if Sean Payton decides to give Wednesday off to Tim Patrick and just ease him back in. But man, was it a sight to see number 12 running routes, catching passes across the middle of the field, and really just being a reliable outlet. And obviously there's going to be some more things we'll talk about. I'll dive on Tim a little bit deeper when we get to our segment coming up here in a little bit, talking about the quarterbacks and how Bo Nix, Jarrett Stidham, and Zach Wilson each looked on the day. But man, he's moving well. He's cutting well. And not only just him, just other receivers as well. Marvin Mims continuing to look strong. I think that this Broncos wide receiver room, I like it a lot, Sarah, right now. Look, there's a lot of guys. I think you know, I've highlighted, I think the 3 proven guys on paper that have NFL production, some question marks, but I think they have some untapped potential in that room that could really blossom in the right scheme, right system if they get the quarterback decision right and if the offense can flow seamlessly. I liked what I saw overall from practice here, but you know, it's time to talk about some other offensive standouts outside of Tim Patrick, who was the star of the day. But I mean, Sarah, I said this as well on Twitter after practice, just watching him. Jaleel McLaughlin looked like the best running back on the team so far as we current, you know, where we're at right now. Now, granted, look, the pads aren't on yet, but Jaleel from OTAs to now with the increased workload that he's had, he didn't get this last year during OTAs because he was a new guy, undrafted guy. But now that he's had some NFL success, he's been featured there, and Sean's got a lot of trust in him. The thing that I saw from Jaleel McLaughlin, he just consistently looks like the most explosive guy, the most consistent guy. And I think that's an exciting thing to have. He may not be the guy that's going to get 20, 25 carries a game, but if he can maintain this pace, I think he can be a very big contributor for the offense this year. He was a standout from Tuesday's practice, in my opinion, from my observation.
And it begs the question of, you know, what is Javonte Williams' future with this team? Because we all hope that he can return to form. But unfortunately, last year it left a bad taste in everybody's mouth. And you don't want to, I don't want to sit here and be all, you know, hot take, I guess, if you want to call it that, and say, well, I mean, Jaleel McLaughlin having a big OTAs could lead to Javonte getting cut. But look, the Broncos drafted Audric Estime, who we know is not participating right now because he was hurt. So we'll see him back at training camp. But there's also Samaje Perine, Blake Watson, in addition to those guys, and those young backs that are on this roster that are going to be fighting for roster spots, fighting for snaps, all these different things. It both plays into Javonte Williams' favor because of the competition aspect, but it also kind of hurts him if all those guys look good, because he has to look good. He has no choice but to look good. So it's like what I responded right when you posted that is like, I don't know whether to be excited about this development, because we should. It's Jaleel McLaughlin looking good. We should be excited about that, or upset that, like, man, if he looks like the best back out there, what does that say about Javonte and his comeback potential season? So I don't know. I think it's both. It's like a hot and cold kind of thing there when we talk about a guy like Jaleel. And you're right. Is he going to get 20 to 25 carries a game? He's not built for that. But is he built for a lot of touches? I think absolutely. In today's NFL, he definitely is.
I still think that Javonte is going to be the starter. I think the strongest case here that Jaleel has, I don't think he's going to be RB1, but I think he is, like, on this trend, he is going to be RB2 based on what we're seeing. Like, he's taking on a lot of responsibility and he's doing a good job, and Sean is noticing that, and Sean is entrusting even more to him. And you see the work ethic. I mean, obviously it's unquestioned there for Jaleel McLaughlin, but I think a lot of people are really trying to figure out, okay, hey, what is the true outlook of the running back position? We won't get a true definitive answer on this really till, I'd say, midway through training camp. Let's see the first couple of preseason games. But I will say Jaleel McLaughlin, Samaje Perine, and Blake Watson each had runs where they were untouched for 15-plus yards on various portions of team period during Tuesday's practice at Broncos Park, powered by Common Spirit. So it's something, I mean, obviously some excitement there, and you look forward to seeing the pads come on, because now you get to see, okay, the defensive line, how are they counteracting what the offensive line's trying to do? I mean, there's so many moving parts right here. We can only just go based on our observations and say, okay, maybe we can project this based on what we've seen here. But there's still a lot of moving parts here, Broncos country. There's no absolutes right now, but just a lot of things like, hey, this is what we're seeing at practice. These are things that these guys can build off of, maybe what the team can build off, and you're always going to get that type of coverage here on Locked On Broncos. But speaking of, you know, really just the offense in general, everyone's talking about the quarterback position. Broncos QBs were all looking a little sharp at mandatory minicamp. I'll tell you why Bo Nix probably stood out a little bit more than everybody else on the afternoon. You're going to get that here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Broncos country, today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at the Game Time app. And with the Game Time app, you can now get NBA Finals tickets even faster, and it's easier to get them. Prices on the Game Time app, they actually go down the closer that it gets to tip off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets and tickets to other sports or events that are going on for that matter. Like, for example, if you're in Denver this week, Zach Bryan's playing at Empower Field at Mile High, you want to go get tickets there last minute? Well, guess what? Game Time has you covered, and you can see exactly what your vantage point is going to be like inside of the app with their seat view, where you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy They also have their lowest price guarantee, or else Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. And the one thing I also like as well, their last minute deals. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Quarterbacks Bo Nix and Jarrett Stidham, they just keep stacking days this offseason. They've been impressive. Cody's going to tell us why. He was out there watching practice, and we're going to hear about the progression of the first round draft pick of the Denver Broncos in 2024, Bo Nix. And want to say thank you to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day, every single day, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where you know it's always your team every day, free and available everywhere that you get your podcasts, as well as you can watch the show on YouTube. Go ahead, hit subscribe and turn the notifications on there on YouTube, because you know what? Then we just jump right to the top of your algorithm. You're going to get updates on the Denver Broncos every single day. And stay on YouTube for Locked On Sports Today, because I know if you're like me, man, you're sick of the national coverage, not focusing on the teams that you want, or having that localized coverage that you desperately crave as somebody who loves your teams. Locked On Sports Today, it's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel that's programmed for you every day to bring you all the biggest stories that you want. And it also brings can't miss analysis, opinions, news. It's streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's talk about the quarterback position here. One of the most exciting discussion points of the entire offseason. I know a lot of times there can be a little bit of wear and tear on listeners, and certainly us who covered the team, of like, all right, we're covering another quarterback battle. We get it. But when the updates are positive, Cody, I don't think anybody can hear enough. You're wanting to hear it from all different angles. So Bo Nix and Jarrett Stidham, and from some accounts, it sounded like Zach Wilson as well, but maybe more so Nix and Stidham, obviously, sound like they had really good days at day one of mandatory minicamp.
Yeah, I'd say all three quarterbacks had solid days. I'd say if we're taking a look at who was ahead, like who did the most and who obviously looked more comfortable. Once again, Jarrett Stidham and Bo Nix were the two guys. I'd say if you had to compare them to Zach Wilson, like they did a significantly better job on the afternoon, just from our observation. And look, and I know these things like quarterback battles can be very frustrating for the fan base. But we always talk about how it's important for every year. Like fans should just always be excited no matter what is going on, because every year is a different year. The script could flip somehow. Hasn't been in the Broncos' favor in the last 8 years, but this could be the year that the script entirely flips for them. When we talk about quarterbacks and the efficiency play from it, obviously Jarrett Stidham got run with the first team on Tuesday's practice. Zach Wilson got the 2s and Bo Nix got the 3s. But then, as you mentioned, they're rotating different guys on the O-line, wide receiver, running back throughout that. So it's not a true definitive first team, second team, third team, but who gets the first reps there. And each quarterback got 4 reps per team period. Denver did 3 team periods on the day. Jarrett Stidham just continues to just have confidence, and obviously being ingrained inside of Sean Payton's system, he looked really solid. He connected with guys like Tim Patrick, Marvin Mims, tight ends like Lucas Kroll, backs out of the backfield. I feel like today was a little bit more of a day in terms of Tuesday's practice. Running backs getting a little bit more involved in the passing game more so than the receivers, but Stidham had no problem. There was one play that he had to Marvin Mims, found him across the middle field, 19, 20 plus yards, like let him in stride. It was a beautiful throw, and it was obviously great to see Marvin do some damage yards after the catch there. So you like the connection there, but then it's like, all right, what is Zach Wilson going to do when he comes in? Zach completed passes, but a majority of his completions were to tailbacks out of the backfield, which, look, isn't a bad thing. It's not a bad strategy. And then he had a couple of routes where he threw it within, 5 to 7 yards, and, they're trying to sustain and just move along, because you only get 4 plays per team period. So it's not a large sample size for us to really critique or praise. But it wasn't in terms of just like, what am I looking for here? Because each guy's getting 4 plays. Is he getting the ball out of his hands quickly? What's the decisiveness level going on there? How does he react to pressure or a potential blitz or a potential sack? There are a couple of plays where Jarrett Stidham or Zach Wilson would have been sacked by Nick Bonitto or Angelo Blackson, John Franklin Myers. But, because you're still going to get the throw off, everyone's going to be debating, was that a sack? Was that not a sack? And by my count, there were at least 3 sacks that those guys would have had in totality combined. But for Jarrett, like Jarrett processed the field well during Tuesday's practice, got rid of the ball in a pretty timely manner. But when we're talking about who's ahead, Bo Nix, like in 7-on-7 and in team period, consistently knew where he was going with the football, was decisive. And there was one play in particular where I think it was a third down play. Bo gets the ball. It's play action. He's reading his first read. He gets to a second read, third read, and it's not there, and there's pressure coming. He sees Tim Patrick as his last outlet option, throws a beautiful laser sidearm, and then he catches it and does some damage yards after the catch there. Bo has got a quick trigger in terms of, despite the coverage, he's recognizing it pre-snap. He's seeing if a safety's dropping and if the other guy's rolling to single high or if they're rolling to two high looks. And he's getting the ball out of his hands quickly, and he's confident in terms of his delivery of the football. And not saying that Jarrett Stidham is not, but Bo Nix was, in terms of timing and precision, was better, in my opinion, during Tuesday's practice. And we'll see what the order of the rotation of that is going to look like on Wednesday.
And again, it's really just music to the ears of Denver Broncos fans. Not that anyone is rooting for, Jarrett Stidham or Zach Wilson to fail by any means, but you want to hear that your first round quarterback is performing up to this level. And I think that that's exactly what this team desperately needs, is somebody that's going to go out there. If he's playing with the threes, if he's playing with the twos or the ones, it doesn't matter. He's going to still make the right decision. He's going to go to the right place with the football, and he's going to be quick on the trigger. Something that you were just discussing on that last play you were describing is just a great reminder, I think, that Bo Nix is much more athletic than I think people give him credit, because he did get rid of the ball so quickly at Oregon. It's easy to forget that this guy was a 5-star dual threat quarterback coming out of the high school ranks, and he was winning a lot with his legs when he was at Auburn. So this is something, an aspect of his game that it's really helped him substantially in terms of not taking a lot of sacks the last 2 seasons as a member of the Oregon football program, because it's not just that he's throwing a lot of screens. It's not just that he's getting the ball out really quickly. It's the fact that when pressure is bearing down, he's able to escape that pressure and get out of the pocket when he needs to and make plays. So I think that there's so many layers to his game that are exciting for Broncos country. And really what you just described, like I said, it should be music to everybody's ears, because you're hearing exactly what you want to hear. He's making good decisions, not a lot of incomplete passes. He's getting out and going through reads. He's doing all these things, and he's pretty much exactly as Sean Payton advertised the night the Broncos drafted him.
And I think that's all you need to have a little bit of confidence in, because look, if the narrative was a little bit different, they're like, Bo's struggling during practice, like, I think it would have a different reaction from the fan base. I think the fan base would be like, wow, wasted pick. Why did they do this? Bo is a guy that, in my opinion, you look at it as well. And I also think this is the case with Jarrett Stidham. Jarrett only had 2 games of sample size in terms of playing in the NFL last season for Denver in a new system, right? And he had some ups and downs. He had some good moments there. But same thing for Bo. Like, these guys should be allowed to struggle and make mistakes. Jarrett should be allowed to make mistakes. Zach Wilson, through the first part of OTs, has made some mistakes, right? And obviously that, in terms of the perception of him, has kind of counted negatively against him, even though maybe in the eyes of Sean Payton, they're like, hey, we understand, like, there's a lot to work with this quarterback. He's still picking up a new offense. I think that Bo is a lot of the concepts that Sean Payton is running are things that he's been used to at Oregon, like a lot of concepts, a lot of terminology. And then you look at Jarrett Stidham, he's been in the system, so he's going to look naturally more comfortable. Zach, I think, will get there. Like, you see some moments, you see some flashes with Zach, but when we're talking about the overall body work right now, in a complete bigger picture, it's been Jarrett and Bo really as that 1A, 1B. Zach Wilson down a little bit in terms of tier there, because it's been inconsistent from him. He still likes to scramble a little bit, which is good. But I'll say this, Bo ended the Broncos' final team period of the afternoon. Denver had put the ball on the 20-yard line. So, right, it's 80 yards to score there. Bo, I don't know if it was play action, because we had the advantage point of really seeing the defense's back end there. But Bo had scrambled out. He had rolled out to his right. He threw across his body for like a 30-plus yard gain to number 30, who was a tryout player on the day to end practice there, but really outrunning some Broncos defenders there. He is athletic, and you saw that on display during Tuesday's practice. But overall, I'd say for each of the quarterbacks, solid day. Bo once again stood out alongside Jarrett Stidham. Zach had solid moments, but maybe we're going to see a little bit more. Tuesday's practice will paint a little bit of a larger picture for us, and obviously we'll have that coverage and recap here on Locked On Broncos. But, in terms of talking about quarterbacks and offensive standouts, we've done that here on today's episode of the show following day one of Broncos mandatory minicamp. But who were the players on the defensive side of the ball that stood out in a big way? And why does it make us excited about the future of the secondary and maybe outside linebacker? We'll tell you here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Nick Bonitto and Riley Moss were two players who stood out for the Broncos defense during day one of mandatory minicamp at Broncos Park, powered by Common Spirit. We'll break down what we saw from them and other defensive performances on the afternoon as we look to day two of mandatory minicamp before the team takes a break to head off for training camp. Really real quick, want to say thank you once again so much to everybody in Broncos country, all the everydayers out there who listen to us wherever you get your podcasts, or those of us that watch on YouTube. We appreciate you so much. You make the show exactly what it is. Sayre and myself love interacting with everybody in Broncos country, whether we agree or disagree on some of the opinions or perspectives that we do see and interact with sometimes. We appreciate you. You're very much as part of the show as much as we are. So thank you for making the show exactly what it is. Sayre, let's talk about defensive standouts during day one of Broncos mandatory minicamp. I think we're going to really start things off with one guy who really kind of was a guy we previewed a little bit early on. We had him on the episode where young players that we have our eyes on. Riley Moss stepping in at the cornerback position here, getting more reps. Obviously, the back injury that he had tweaked last week, not an issue for him during Tuesday's practice. He was out there making plays, getting reps. And one thing I liked about not only just that, special teams as a gunner alongside Tremont Smith, but once again, just watching him disciplined in terms of his back pedal, his alignment, his communication. He had one play, which I think if you talk about a defensive play of the day, they were looking for Josh Reynolds. The offense was downfield. Riley Moss was in good coverage, was in trail position there, hand on the hip, and just timed it, got up long, knocked the football away on what would have been a touchdown by Josh Reynolds, and got a little bit of praise from Sean Payton after practice. He looked good. It was a welcome sight to see here during Tuesday's practice.
Yeah, we talked about it earlier this week on the show, really needing to see Riley Moss out there practicing well and hitting the ground running. And I think this is exactly what we ordered. So, I mean, you know what? Our compliments to the chef, I guess, if you want to put it that way. It's good to hear. Sean Payton did compliment Riley Moss for his length, which that is a big deal when you're talking about a play downfield against somebody like Josh Reynolds, who kind of an underrated 6'3", if I can put it that way, because he doesn't necessarily play like a big receiver, but he's a big, long receiver with a big catch radius. And for Riley Moss to go up to the catch point and, beat him to the ball is a big deal. And Sean Payton talked about that. And he also talked about his versatility, mentioned the fact that he's been playing a little inside and outside. So once again, if you're an everyday listener of Locked On Broncos, you've probably heard us talking about that, hey, Jaquan McMillan could play outside and Riley Moss could play inside potentially, or they could maybe interchange depending on the matchups. And that's going to be so valuable in this defense going forward. So really, I mean, exactly what we ordered in terms of what we wanted to see and hear about from Riley Moss on day one of mandatory minicamp. And let's just hope that he can continue to stack those days.
Well, and Brandon Jones, obviously Denver's offseason acquisition at safety, worked on the side field. He participated in individual period here for the Broncos. Obviously was in team stretch, but did not participate in team. So we got to see Devin Key step up right next to PJ Locke. And look, Devin Key's a guy. I asked Sean Payton after practice what he's seen from him, and he said he stacked some really good days out here, not only just on defense, but in terms of special teams. You saw him getting involved in the personal protector role on punt, which if anybody knows, you ever play special teams, the personal protector has probably got one of the more important roles on the punt team unit than anybody else outside of the snapper and the punter and really the gunners there. But it's a key component, and he was leading the way there, getting a lot of reps. And he might be a guy. Look, Broncos country right now is saying it might be a little early here, but I'm saying keep an eye for Devin Key as he gets into the mix here, number 26 here for the Broncos. You'll see him a little bit in the preseason, but a guy who obviously I think can factor in, make the practice squad, or maybe even fight to make the 53-man roster. It's a loaded defensive back room right now on the back end at cornerback and safety right now. Caden Stearns making progress, as well as he's looking to get back on the field here very, very soon. I think we anticipate training camp for him. Had to mention him, but in terms of the linebacker position, we got to hear from Alex Singleton following practice on Tuesday and really just talk about, okay, it's, now it's different. Like there's contention, like for whoever's going to start next to him, it's not going to be Josie Jewell, but it is going to be Cody Barton, Justin Sternad, and Jonas Griffith. And also an undrafted rookie free agent linebacker getting a little bit of a shout out here from Sean Payton as well, is really kind of factoring into getting an opportunity to potentially start, which at first, to be honest with you, I didn't see that as a possibility. I always thought it was going to be between Barton, Sternad, and Griffith. But now Lavelle Bailey's name is in the mix to that position battle as well.
Yeah, I guess keep his name on your radar for Denver Broncos fans out there who are kind of wondering who could be maybe a sleeper from this rookie class to emerge. It sounds like Lavelle Bailey is somebody who could very well do that. Highly, highly productive at Fresno State, did all the different things that you want to see linebackers do. I mean, played well in coverage, made clutch plays at the end of a few games. I think he kind of developed a bit of a reputation there for Fresno State in some of the videos that I've watched of him in terms of making plays late in games. So somebody that he's kind of just got that football gene. That's kind of what Josie Jewell is leaving behind. Is he wasn't the most athletic guy, wasn't the fastest guy, certainly, was capable enough to do all the things that was needed from him. But I think really just that football gene that he had made him a really effective starter in the NFL and got him obviously a lot of money from the Carolina Panthers, which Alex Singleton joked about as well. But maybe keep an eye on Lavelle Bailey. It's not necessarily anything to just kind of, just throw that away as coach speak. I mean, Sean Payton doesn't have to mention his name there. And I guess he didn't technically mention his name. He said the Fresno State guy. So one of these days, just like I guess we all need to make sure we remember number 85, Lucas Krull, from a comment Sean Payton made a couple of weeks ago. Maybe we should all learn Lavelle Bailey and his name and his number and start to talk about him as a potential training camp sleeper.
Yeah, no, I think as much competition is going on with this team, there's a lot of young players, a lot of young names that, to be honest with you, Sayre, like you look at this team in comparison from last year, like, wow, like this could be an entirely different starting lineup in 2024 than it was last year, but there might be a little bit more excitement. I mean, like I said, the vibe overall in Dove Valley, just being at the practices, being around the players, like the vibe around the players is very, very different. Like there's a lot of enthusiasm. There's a lot of energy. And there's a lot of guys speaking out and like having a voice, which is a good thing. Like, and obviously this is going to be something that's going to be ongoing. It's not just going to be, okay, hey, we watched day one of mandatory minicamp. This is great news here. It's a great thing to be able to see. Can you sustain it? I think as you go through some bumps and bruises along the way, there's going to be times where Denver loses a game or two. Like, how do they respond? I think that's a really big key there. But so far, a step in the right direction here for the direction of the Broncos locker room here. Some other guys who looked impressive. Look, John Franklin Myers, Sayre, like big guy, really strong guy. And even without pads was impressive to me. I'm excited to see when the pads come on. Sean Payton even threw that out to us last week at OTA. He said, when the pads come on, like you're going to see a little bit more as to like why this guy is an impact player. You saw it certainly during Tuesday's mandatory minicamp practice. And then obviously Nick Bonitto, man, having yet another impressive day in terms of his burst. His first step is unbelievably explosive, but I feel like from a pass rush standpoint, I think he's added a couple of moves to his arsenal that I'm excited for Broncos country to maybe be able to see this upcoming season. It was a good day for the Broncos defense in terms of their rush and pressure, in terms of creating that. As we mentioned on the day, you always have the debates. Felt like the defense had at least 3 sacks on the afternoon. Nick Bonitto would have been responsible for 2 of them. Angelo Blackson, potentially one of them. And then arguably John Franklin Myers on one play as well. Impressive overall.
You want to see those upgrades on the defensive front, right? I mean, that's exactly what we called for this offseason, and those guys bringing it, even without the pads on. So I think having that sort of physicality, even without the pads and the testing of the offensive line early on in the offseason is going to be huge when the pads do come on, because you want the Broncos to be tone setters on both sides of the line of scrimmage. I think having these guys really step in and step up and be those tone setters, which I feel like John Franklin Myers is going to be that for this team, very much so a tone setter. You want that kind of energy when the pads aren't on, because when they are on, he's going to be out there. I mean, it's probably a good thing Dalton Reisner's not here anymore, Cody, because he was at the center of a lot of training camp fights in the past. So, but that's the kind of energy and intensity that you want.
There's no way I'd want to start a training camp fight with John Franklin Myers. Like whoever does that, very gutsy. I mean, best of luck to you. I mean, there's going to be some chippiness, and we've seen a little bit of chippiness so far. Nothing crazy, nothing that like, oh my gosh, there was a fight at practice, nothing like that. So I imagine when the pads come on, you're going to see some of that kind of boil over a little bit. I'm sure someone is going to make the smart business decision not to start one with John Franklin Myers there. We'll see how things pan out here. But Broncos country, that'll wrap up today's episode of the show here, recapping day one of Broncos mandatory minicamp. all the storylines on quarterbacks, all the guys looking sharp for the most part. Tim Patrick being the star of the day at the offensive side of the ball, and some sleepers and guys that we've seen at the defensive side who had standout performances on the afternoon. Well, the Broncos are back at mandatory minicamp on Wednesday in Dove Valley. I'll be at practice once again. We'll give you a full recap on what we see on the day, including the quarterback competition and other standout players on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Broncos for all you everyday listeners. We'll see you then.